What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Friday, May 15th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. And we have a massive 13-game MLB slate to break down tonight. Should be fun to walk through. Tons of pitching, tons of good offensive options, as you would expect on a 13-game slate. Ownership doesn't play quite as big of a role. It's still important, but you just don't get the same raw ownership numbers that you would on, say, last night's 5-gamer. So you can generally kind of just get to the spots that you want to. Makes for pretty fun lineup building. Generally, you're going to feel pretty decent about the lineups that you play. So as always, we're going to go game by game, talking about the pitching, stacks, hitters, all of that in each game. But first, hit the thumbs up button, give the show a like. Be sure to comment throughout the show. Those are appreciated. Happy to answer any questions that you have as well. Other than that, we're going to jump into it, starting with the Seattle Mariners taking on the Baltimore Orioles tonight in Baltimore. We have John Means on the mound for the O's, Bryce Miller going for Seattle. Neither pitcher is projected for much ownership here, and they probably shouldn't be. Again, it's a 13-game slate, so you can be picky with the pitchers that you are rostering. Both of these guys are pretty good. Means has a good strikeout matchup against Seattle. Miller has a very difficult matchup against Baltimore. Big park downgrade for him as well. This is somebody that, if this game were in Seattle, we would certainly be more interested in. We'd be more interested in both pitchers, but Miller in particular goes from pitching in the best pitcher's park in baseball, the best strikeout park, the best park for preventing runs, to pitching in a stadium that plays up left-handed power against a Baltimore team that has basically nothing but left-handed power. So it's a tough spot for him, and he's pretty expensive. If this were a shorter slate, both of these guys would be on the table because they are good pitchers, but on this slate, neither one looks particularly interesting. I don't expect the offenses to look that interesting either, just because there are 26 teams playing, and these are both pretty good pitchers. Seattle, from an all-stack standpoint, showing up in the middle of the pack just because they are cheap. Baltimore coming in towards the bottom. But the thing you have to keep in mind for the Mariners as well is that they do have a lot of power in their lineup. It is pretty inexpensive, but while this stadium is good for left-handed power, it's not good at all for right-handed power. They moved the wall in left field back a couple seasons ago, so it's very, very difficult to hit right-handed home runs here. You can hit the ball well, and in a lot of stadiums, it would be a double or a home run. In Camden Yards, it ends up being an out. So that does make Rodriguez, Raleigh, Garver, Polanco, Haniger, Moore, France, all this right-handed power just a lot less appealing. Whereas on the other side, you do get, as I mentioned before, the park upgrade for park downgrade for Miller, but a good park for the Orioles lefties. You have a lot of left-handed power here going against Miller. This park, they didn't do anything to the right field wall, so this park does still play up left-handed power. Since debuting last year, Miller has actually allowed a 377 expected WOBA and 241 expected ISO to left-handed hitters. So it is interesting. Again, it's a 13-game slate, so in context, it's not that interesting, and that's why they're not showing up a lot. But if you just wanted to, search out good hitters in a pretty good spot, Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, Ryan O'Hearn, those three guys in particular, I think are pretty interesting, just home run pick type plays. They're not going to get much ownership. And the reason is that, in the case of Rutschman and Henderson, they're pretty expensive. In O'Hearn's case, first base or outfield, he lost first base eligibility, but outfield, there's just a million other options on a 13-game slate. But they're going to be low owned. They are in a pretty good home run spot. So those guys individually are interesting, but still just not guys that are going to show up a ton when you build lineups on a 13-game slate. So nothing really that I think you should be prioritizing from this game. Next, we have the White Sox taking on the Yankees in Yankee Stadium, and this one's going to be a bit different. You have Mike Clevinger on the mound for the White Sox. You have Nestor Cortes going for the Yankees. Cortes projected for about 30% ownership here. He showed up in about 22% of the lineups that I built. Good matchup against the White Sox. Good pitcher overall. Obviously not a great park to pitch in, but for the season, Cortes striking out about 23.5% of hitters, 3.95 xFIP. Good pitcher in a good spot. Low implied run total for the White Sox. Cortes certainly looks good. Clevinger on the other side does not. Tough matchup against the Yankees in Yankee Stadium. Not a very good pitcher. He used to be, back in the day with Cleveland, this was somebody that you really liked in DFS. That guy doesn't exist anymore. 2.9 K-minus BB percentage this season for Clevinger. Just shy of a 15% strikeout percentage. Just shy of a 12% walk percentage. 5.52 xFIP. I don't really see any case for getting to him in DFS. There is a strong case for getting to the Yankees going up against him. I'm surprised that they aren't showing up higher than they are as far as stacks go. Like only showing up in 6% of the lineups that I built. Maybe a pricing thing because obviously they are expensive, but it's generally not that difficult to find value on a 13-game slate. So maybe that's something that changes by lock as we get confirmed lineups. But right now it seems like in my head, I'm higher on the Yankees than they're showing up. When you build lineups using data, that easily can change by lock. Obviously running these lineups early in the day. I will be in Discord throughout the day. People that subscribe to my Dub Club packages will get my updated stuff later on in the day. But right now, I would like to see these Yankees numbers higher because it's a really, really good spot for Soto, really good spot for Judge. Volpe's going to look good at 4,800. It probably is a pricing thing there, but then, you get down to a $3,800 Verdugo in Yankee Stadium, $4,200 Rizzo in Yankee Stadium. Austin Wells, 3,400 is cheap. Even Stanton at 4,400 is a pretty appealing play here against a pitcher that doesn't miss a lot of bats. So, I think the Yankees look good. Maybe they're just not getting ownership because there are, 25 other teams on the slate, but I would like to be getting to more Yankees by lock than I am right now. Aggressive Goose in chat said, do you put any stock in home away splits, or are they something that should generally be ignored? Short answer for me is no. There are cases where I think it matters, but generally I think they can be explained by other things. Like, for example, I don't know what home away splits you're referring to specifically here, but let's just say that you're asking about like Juan Soto is better at home than on the road. Something like that would be explained by he hits in Yankee Stadium for his home games and his away games are in less favorable parks in a lot of cases. Obviously, I don't know if that's what you're referring to specifically, but in a lot of cases, players with good home road splits, like if they're good at home, it's going to be because they're a hitter and their home stadium is good for hitting, or vice versa. Their home stadium is terrible for hitting, and so they're better on the road. Pitchers, the same thing exists, obviously with home and away parks. One spot where you will see it kind of show up for pitchers is sometimes you'll get pitchers that are better at home, even though they pitch in a park that isn't favorable for pitching. Every mound in every stadium is different. So sometimes you will get guys, especially if they've been with the same team for a while, where they just pitch better at home because the grounds crew will do what they want to the mound. They're comfortable on the mound. Aaron Nola is an example of this. He generally pitches better at home in Philly, even though that's a tough place to pitch, than he does on the road. And that's been true for his whole career. So there are certainly exceptions, but in general, home road splits are going to be explained by other things like whether or not they're hitting in a park or pitching in a park that is advantageous for hitting or pitching. So it's not something that generally I'm going to be paying too much attention to. On the other side of this one, no real interest in getting to the White Sox. I think the only case that you would make is that, for one, Cortez is getting 30% ownership, so you do have negative correlation with the field. Also, the White Sox are cheap. Andrew Vaughn does have power at 3,300. Pham and Jimenez are reasonably priced, but they're outfielders where you have a million good outfield plays. So it's, to me, a spot where getting to the Yankees, whether that's Cortez or the Bats, is where I want to be the most. Next, we have the Rays taking on the Blue Jays in Toronto. Tyler Alexander on the mound for Tampa Bay. Chris Bassett going for the Blue Jays. Bassett pulling about 16% ownership. He is reasonably priced at 7,200. You do have some strikeouts in this Tampa Bay lineup. They rank in the middle of the pack in strikeout percentage at 23.3%. Against right-handed pitching this season, but they are an above-average offense as well, 105 WRC+. Bassett, not a great pitcher, does typically do better against right-handed hitters than left-handed hitters, as you would expect. Overall this season, 21.3% strikeout percentage, 4.2 xFIP. He's just kind of a value play where he's a little bit underpriced. Lefties since the start of last year, 219 expected ISO, only 112 to righties with an expected WOBA below 300. Most of the bats that you would typically worry about in the Tampa Bay lineup are right-handed, so that does benefit Bassett. I have him going a bit over-owned here, but I think he's a perfectly reasonable SP2 if you need it. Offensively, Josh Lowe looks like the top play here, and I agree with that completely. That is something that I was hoping to see. He's still 4,200. I know I've mentioned it pretty much every day since he came back from the injured list, but this is somebody that had a 130 WRC plus last year and about 500 plate appearances. He projects for about a 120 WRC plus going forward. He has a favorable matchup against Bassett, who, as I just mentioned, has been bad against left-handed hitters for a while. it looks like a really good spot for Lowe. This park does not play up left-handed power to the extent that it does right-handed power, but Josh Lowe is just really good and underpriced. Other than that, you just see the Rays showing up a lot in general. I think that is in part because they are pretty cheap for the power that they have. They do also work to some extent as a leverage stack against a relatively popular Bassett, so I don't mind that. I'm a little surprised the Blue Jays aren't showing up more than they are, given that they are pretty inexpensive against Alexander. They have certainly struggled this season. George Springer in particular has been bad. Vlad Guerrero started out the year really poorly. He has been hitting the ball harder recently, which is good to see. You always assume that players like that are going to rebound sooner than later. Seems like we're getting that from Guerrero. So this is kind of like the Yankees, where I thought they would show up a little bit more for me than they are. The field is projected to get to them. 8% Springer, 9% Bichette, 6% Guerrero. Whereas right now, I'm at like 2 to 3% in the lineups that I built. I think the field is closer to where like I would want to be, where I think it should be. Again, this is early in the day, so a lot of things can impact how lineups are looking right now in what I built. But it is a good spot for these guys. Sorry about my voice. I'm still kind of trying to get it back. But Alexander, since the start of last season, 209 expected ISO, 330 expected WOBA to righties. Not a total gas can, and probably won't be in the game that long. So that aspect of it is not super appealing. But the Blue Jays bats here at their prices do look pretty decent. Next, we have the Minnesota Twins taking on the Guardians in Cleveland. Simeon Woods Richardson on the mound for Minnesota in a very difficult strikeout matchup. Tristan McKenzie on the mound for Cleveland. Woods Richardson has been solid so far this season, striking out 22% of hitters with just shy of a 4 xFIP. But keep in mind, he did have a couple of matchups against the White Sox. Not positive going from memory. I think he faced the Mariners as well. So he has had some really, really good strikeout matchups driving up that strikeout percentage. He doesn't project to be a good strikeout pitcher. He has a below average strikeout matchup here, although the current version of the Guardians lineup is a little bit easier to strike out than their fully healthy version. It's still not a good strikeout matchup. McKenzie on the other side, we know, is pitching through elbow injury. He hasn't been good so far this year, only striking out 20% of hitters, walking 13.5%, 5.13 xFIP, and he's not cheap at $8,700. So I think it's difficult to really want to get to either of these pitchers. From a stacking standpoint, neither offense is showing up as a priority right now in the lineups that I built. I wouldn't mind getting to either one in tournaments just because I don't think either pitcher is particularly good. As I mentioned, McKenzie is struggling this year. And then on the other side, Woods Richardson probably will start to struggle sooner than later. But in the context of a 13-game slate, I can see why neither team shows up a ton. You know, the park isn't great for hitting. Neither team has a particularly high implied run total. I do like Jose Ramirez at 5,900. Tyler Freeman's cheap leading off. Correa's pretty cheap at 3,900. But overall, doesn't look like any priorities in this game, but they are low-owned stacks that certainly have upside in their respective matchups. The Mets are taking on the Miami Marlins tonight in Miami. Christian Scott on the mound for the Mets. Jesus Luzardo is going for Miami. Luzardo, 7,400, pulling about 17% ownership. He showed up in 15% of the lineups that I built. He's got good strikeout stuff typically. So far this year, striking out 26% of hitters, 3.82 xFIP. Good pitcher's park, good price tag. I'm getting to him more than I'm getting to Bassett right now, which I'm perfectly fine with. I think that they are somewhat similar, but I would prefer getting to Luzardo. Christian Scott on the other side, rookie pitcher for the Mets. He's made 2 starts this year, 12 and 2/3 innings pitched. Projects for around a 22% strikeout percentage going forward, depending on what model you look at. A couple of models that I like, Steamer and the Bat, are both higher than that. 24% for Steamer, about 25% for the Bat. So the main takeaway here is that Scott does project to be a pretty good pitcher. He does project to have pretty good strikeout stuff. He's a top 100 prospect. So you have the pedigree there. You have the good matchup against Miami. 11% projected ownership, showed up in 8% of the lineups that I built at 8,100. Just looks like a solid SP2. On smaller slates, you'd probably be getting to him a lot. On this slate, he kind of just looks like another guy, but happy with whatever, Christian Scott I do get to. I don't anticipate getting to too much of either offense. The Mets are showing up a bit right now, which is kind of surprising to me, actually very surprising to me given the matchup and the park, something that probably changes by lock. Again, I think lineups just look kind of weird right now, at least from an offensive standpoint. But you do have Francisco Lindor at 4,500, probably pulling things up a bit. JD Martinez at 3,300 against the lefty in Luzardo, probably pulling things up a bit. Alonso's cheap at 4,500. So this is a team that right now they probably look a little bit better than they will by lock, just because guys in the projected lineup in good hitting spots are cheap. By lock, you'll have a few other teams where you have unexpected value bats in good spots, driving up those stacks as well. So from a value standpoint, and upside standpoint, the Mets look fine, but I don't anticipate this being a team that I get tons of by lock just because of the park and the matchup. San Diego is taking on the Braves in Atlanta. This game looks like it could have weather issues just based on the 12-hour forecast or whatever. That obviously can change. It's Atlanta. It's getting warmer for most of the summer. It's going to be, there could be weather issues in Atlanta. That's how it looks right now, but obviously something to keep an eye on as we get closer to lock. We have on the mound for San Diego, we have Matt Waldron, Max Fried going for the Braves. Neither pitcher is getting much ownership here, and neither one probably should, given the matchups. Fried is where I would go first. He's a very good pitcher, but still just has a difficult matchup against a San Diego team that is tough to strike out. 8,800 is a pretty healthy price tag as well on a slate where you have plenty of good pitching. Waldron against the Braves, I have no real interest in getting to. From a stacking standpoint, Atlanta showing up in the middle of the pack, San Diego showing up closer to the bottom as they should be. With the Braves, it's a decent spot. They're just going to be expensive. It also does depend on what version of their lineup you're getting as far as how easy they are to stack. Austin Riley's been out. He is in the projected lineup that I used before the show, so that makes them more expensive and more difficult to stack, but obviously if he's in, he's going to look good. Acuna has been hitting the ball harder recently. His expected WOBA over his last 50 at-bats is up 7 to 8 points, or 7 to 8% rather, from his previous 50 at-bats. So that's not something that you're generally using as like a predictive stat, like, oh, this guy's going to be good going forward because he's been good in his last 50 plate appearances. But when you're talking about somebody like Acuna that has a long track record of being a great hitter, and then he starts out the season hitting for basically no power, it is good to see his, rolling expected WOBA more in line with what he projects to do going forward than his early results. So he seems to be breaking out of it a bit. Ozzie Albies, Matt Olson, these guys are obviously good if you can get there. Marcell Ozuna has been a very, very good hitter so far this season. The problem from a stacking standpoint is just how expensive they are. But whatever Atlanta you can get to, you're going to feel pretty good about. Waldron's certainly not a great pitcher, and Atlanta is a great offense. Next, we have Oakland taking on Kansas City in KC. Cole Reagans on the mound for the Royals. Kyle Muller going for Oakland. No reason to be getting to Muller here. Cole Reagans, on the other hand, is pretty expensive at 9,200, but he gets a good strikeout matchup. He's a very good strikeout pitcher and just looks like a good play. 27% strikeout percentage, 19.5% K-BB percentage for Reagans this year. 3.12 xFIP is very, very good. Obviously, this park downplays home runs. It does play up most other offensive stats, so it's not necessarily a good park for pitching overall. It is a really difficult park to get strikeouts in, but it does downplay home runs. We know Oakland strikes out a lot. We know they hit a lot of home runs. So in that regard, it does set up kind of nicely for Reagans. I don't anticipate wanting to get to a lot of Oakland against Reagans. They obviously do have power, and it's pretty cheap with Langoliers, JD Davis, Brent Rooker, if you wanted to go that route. But Reagans does have a very, very good changeup that he can use to mitigate right-handed power. Only a 133 expected ISO to righties this year with a 28% K percentage, 113 expected ISO against them since the start of last season. So there's nothing that you're looking at and saying like, oh, I want to get to A's bats here other than they're cheap and they're facing a 34% owned pitcher. Too Cool Rad said, Rooker let me down last night. Not sure if you were watching that game, but his first plate appearance, he hit one onto the train tracks. It was probably like 5 feet foul down the left field line. Kind of knew how that was going to go as someone that had a ton of Brent Rooker. Once you see him launch one like 450 feet and it's just foul, you kind of assume he's just not going to get there. So yeah, that was really disappointing last night. On the other side for KC, they are going to look good. Bobby Witt Jr. at 6,500, top end shortstop option as always. Not a bad matchup here at all against Muller. Garrett Hampson, if he's in the lineup, like he's just showing up as a value placeholder right now. This is the kind of guy that drops off by lock, but he does have multi-position eligibility. He is cheap. If he's in the lineup, he gives you some stolen base upside as well. Michael Garcia's salary has come down a bit. If he's the top of the lineup, he'll look pretty good. Nelson Velasquez at 3K gives you some salary relief. I wouldn't, if you're stacking, I wouldn't avoid somebody like Pasquantino, even though it's lefty-lefty, just because Muller probably won't be in the game that long, and then you are likely to be getting the platoon advantage later on for Pasquantino. So Kansas City looks pretty good. Bobby Witt standing out in particular. This is another spot here where Oakland's showing up as a top 5 overall stack when you include 2 through 5 mans, I just don't really see it. I don't think that necessarily holds by lock. I think a lot of it just has to do with how cheap they are. The case again would be that they have cheap power against a popular pitcher, but on a slate with 26 teams, I just don't see Oakland showing up like this. Same for, the Mets. KC, I do think holds their position because it is a good spot. You do have Bobby Witt Jr. pulling up your stacks because he's such a good play at shortstop. So I think Oakland exposure comes down. Kansas City, I think, probably remains about the same. Angels are taking on the Rangers in Texas. Good hitters park. We have Tyler Anderson on the mound for the Angels. We have Andrew Heaney going for the Rangers. Heaney's pulling a little bit of ownership because he's cheap at 6,600, and this Angels lineup without Mike Trout is not very good. Heaney's strikeout numbers are down a bit this season, 22.5% K percentage, 4.21 xFIP, but they are going the right direction. He started out the year really slowly. He's slowly creeping back towards what we generally expect from him. I don't have any issues with using him as a cheap SP2 if you need it. But again, this isn't a good park to pitch in. He's not a particularly good pitcher overall, but as a value play, perfectly fine. I don't have any real interest in getting to Tyler Anderson at 7,800 in a really tough spot against the Rangers. I do have interest in getting to the Rangers hitters. They're showing up as the top stack right now, and I do expect that they will finish as one of the top stacks on the slate in terms of I don't mean finish as far as how the slate ends up playing out, because who knows. But as far as a top 5 stack in terms of just projected outcomes, I expect that they will remain there. Adolis Garcia, 5,700. Corey Seager, 5,500. Both of these guys are expensive. Tyler Anderson's not a terrible pitcher by any means, but 178 expected ISO to righties since the start of last year, 197 so far this year. Doesn't give up tons of power, but gives up enough that looking to these right-handed power bats makes sense. Lefties have a 201 expected ISO against him since the start of last season. His best pitch is his changeup, which is a pitch that, if that's your best pitch, you do tend to have reverse splits. So I have no issues whatsoever with Corey Seager, even in the lefty-lefty matchup. Nathaniel Lowe at 4,400 is going to look good. I like Jonah Heim. And then you get some value with Tavares, Wenzel, if he's in the lineup, Duran, third base and outfield eligible. It looks like a pretty easy team to stack that has a ton of upside. So I like the Rangers quite a bit. The Angels, I think, as a value stack makes some sense because Andrew Heaney does give up home runs. Like, this is a team where I'm not getting to them in the lineups I built as much as I was getting to Oakland. The field is getting to them like I was getting to Oakland. I would rather be getting to these Angels bats than Oakland. Just, they're in a better park. They have a better matchup. And this is ownership aside. Like, should Joe Adell be 3 times as popular as his counterpart on the A's? Probably not, but they're low enough owned in terms of raw ownership that I don't care all that much. Joe Adell at 3,400 in this park against a home run prone Heaney is just a much easier case for me to make than, JD Davis at the same price against Cole Reagans in Kansas City. So I think if you're looking for value upside, Zach Neto, Joe Adell, Logan O'Hoppe, even these guys are perfectly fine in a good hitter's park against a pitcher that, even when he was at the top of his game, was extremely home run prone. Milwaukee is taking on Houston tonight in Houston. Two good offenses in this game. Freddie Peralta going for the Brewers. Hunter Brown is on the mound for Houston. Neither pitcher is getting much ownership because of the matchups. If this were a smaller slate or they were in different matchups, you'd probably be getting ownership here because Freddie Peralta has a 32% strikeout percentage this year, 3.28 xFIP. Really good pitcher. It's just tough when he's going up against an Astros team that has the lowest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this season at 16.2%, 118 WRC plus. Just a really, really good offense. So it's tough to pay that salary for Peralta unless you're just trying to be contrarian. I do think he's going a little bit under-owned, but nothing crazy. Hunter Brown on the other side, 6,900, projected for 5% ownership, showing up in 8% of my lineups. He is cheap. He does have some sort of pedigree. He was a good strikeout pitcher previously. He started out this year really poorly, but he's gotten things together. He's up to about a 23% strikeout percentage for the season, 3.95 xFIP. But again, this is a good Brewers lineup. They have a lot of power. I think that Brown's going a little bit under-owned, similarly to Peralta, but not somebody I'm truly building around. I think he's kind of in that same bucket with like Andrew Heaney. Offensively, I don't mind getting to the Brewers. I think it's more difficult to get to Houston. Like, obviously, Houston has a lot of name value in their lineup. You're not going to be upset about getting to like Kyle Tucker or Yordan Alvarez, but on a 13-game slate, there's just so many guys that I can get to. Like Juan Soto and Aaron Judge aren't getting ownership. Just give me those guys. Like, why would I want Alvarez against Peralta instead of Judge when they're projected for, negligible ownership? So that's why I don't really think I get to much Houston here. On the Milwaukee side, you do at least have the angle of Brown has had some issues this year. As I said, he's been pitching better recently, but 172 expected ISO allowed to lefties since the start of last year. It is only 108 this year, 119 to righties this year. So he's done a very good job of limiting power this season. The Brewers are also expensive. Christian Yelich, 5,600. Contreras, 6K. Even Bryce Terang and Willy Adames are getting up there. So we went through like a 2-week stretch where the Brewers were always a good stack because across the board they were cheap. That's not the case anymore. That ownership, I guess, has driven up their pricing, and these guys are just really expensive. So I think it's tough to really get the offense this year. I think it's tough to get the pitching. This is just one of those games where it all kind of cancels each other out. And on smaller slates, it would be really interesting because you have a ton of low-owned talent in this game. But on a slate of this size, it's less interesting because most likely this game kind of just, cancels each other out. Like the pitchers pitch pretty well, but not as good as usual because the matchup is tough. The hitters do some damage, but not as much as usual because the matchup is tough. So, you can bet on low-owned talent if you want, but kind of like I was saying, on a 13-game slate, you can get low-owned talent in this game, but you can get low-owned talent in better spots because it's a 13-game slate. Most people are low-owned. So pretty tough to, I think, prioritize anything from this game. Now, before we move on to Boston and Seattle, again, a reminder that I am starting a new site coming out shortly with a few of the best DFS players ever, Uticow, Brick75, Nerdy Tenor. It's going to be a high-level strategy site. We all have different styles, different approaches. So we're going to be putting out strategic videos teaching you how to improve at DFS from a variety of angles, how a lot of process type stuff, math-based stuff. But, again, we all have different approaches to DFS. So regardless of what your style is, how you want to approach DFS, we think that there will be something there for you. And I'm in the process of getting started on some of the videos that I'll be putting out. If you have anything specifically that you're interested in hearing me discuss in depth, whether that's process-wise, DFS strategy-wise, whatever it may be, put it in the comments to this video, DM me on Twitter, tweet at me directly. I don't really care how you do it. Just tell me what you're interested in hearing about. And if there's something that, catches my eye and I think would be productive and quality content, I will get to work on that. So just drop that in the comments or wherever you want to reach me. That would help out a lot. Just anything that you want to hear from me specifically. And if you haven't already and you are interested in knowing when that site goes live, you can use the Endgame Syndicate link in the description below. There is an email sign up link on that landing page. Put your email in there. You'll get a notification when that site does go live in the near future. So really excited about doing that. Really excited about working with those guys. I know I'll learn a lot from them. In addition to, I think you guys will learn a lot from all of us collectively. So just reach out to me if you have anything that you want me to talk about specifically. Now, moving on to the Red Sox and the St. Louis Cardinals. In St. Louis, so park downgrade for Boston. We have Jeff L said, is it all baseball or any basketball? It's everything. It's going to be it's different than the sites that exist now. It's not going to be, sims and projections like exist everywhere else. It's going to be more high level strategy. We all play pretty much every sport. Everybody involved with that site plays most sports. So it's going to be obviously some sport specific strategy content, but if you have questions about any sport in particular, throw them out there. Obviously I am better at some sports than others. They are better at some sports than others. But for me, I can probably give you the best strategy content, the best as far as my strategy content will be the best around baseball, basketball, probably NFL. But yeah, if you have anything sports specific, doesn't really matter the sport, throw that out there. If it's DFS in general, throw it out there. But yeah, the site as a whole, strategy and advice wise will be all encompassing. So just hit me up with those if you have ideas. Moving on to Boston and St. Louis, Brian Bayo taking on Kyle Gibson. Bayo 8K, Gibson 7,500. Not a great matchup for either guy. Neither guy's getting much ownership. Neither pitcher is bad. Bayo gives you more strikeout upside, generally than Gibson does, but not a great strikeout pitcher either. 21% for the season. Just don't really see getting to either one of these guys. But this is another spot where I'd kind of be surprised if I'm getting to a ton of the offenses either. Boston's showing up a lot in the lineups that I built. that surprises me. Like, Gibson's not a terrible pitcher. The park's not great for hitting home runs. I guess the counterpoint is like there aren't a lot of terrible pitchers on this slate, but Gibson, since the start of last season, 195 expected ISO to lefties, 163 to righties. He does give up some power to lefties. He's just not a total gas can. I do like Willie Abreu at 4K. This is a guy that's been hitting well this season, exceeding expectations so far. Maybe that continues, maybe it doesn't, but he should have a good spot in the order. He is cheap. Jarren Duran and Rafael Devers gives you two more lefties that are good against Gibson. So I don't know. I guess maybe I'm talking myself into liking Boston a little bit more, getting lined up a little bit more with how they're showing up for me. Dominic Smith, cheap, not a great hitter, but only 2,300 from the left side. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I like Boston more looking at the pricing and kind of thinking about how your roster construction looks than I thought I was going to in a matchup against Gibson. So I will go ahead and side with the early data on this one. I guess I just like Boston a little bit more than I thought. St. Louis on the other side against Bayo, I have a more difficult time wanting to get to. When Bayo's on, the ball's on the ground. The Boston pitching staff as a whole has been very good. So I don't really like the St. Louis side. I do think that Boston, even though it's not a great matchup against Gibson, it's not a great park to hit in. You just have pretty favorable pricing. And I do like that the best hitters on Boston all have the platoon advantage with Gibson as well. Detroit taking on Arizona in Arizona. So Detroit going over to the West Coast or close to it. Tarek Skubal going for the Tigers. Ryan Nelson going for Arizona. Skubal pulling about 17% ownership at 10K. He showed up in 19% of the lineups I built. So I'm right around the field. Think he's going a little underowned, but he looks really, he's a really good pitcher. The matchup against Arizona is tough. They do have a lot of good right-handed hitters in their lineup, but Skubal has a 31.6% K percentage this year. His K minus BB percentage is the best on the slate, and it's not even close at 27.4%. 27.4%. The next highest is Peralta at 23.1, excluding John Means in his couple of starts. Skubal has a 2.53 xFIP, best on the slate. He is a really, really good pitcher, and not getting a ton of ownership here because, again, there is good pitching elsewhere on the slate. But I like Skubal quite a bit. Ryan Nelson on the other side, I have no interest there. The Tigers are showing up, middle of the pack in terms of stacks. I guess I should mention it too, since I have been surprised by sort of how teams are lining up here. If you look at the numbers on the right-hand side, these are all pretty close. So like saying, Boston is second or Oakland is fourth, Oakland doesn't need to fall very far to be like 10th or 12th. So I guess that's something to mention too, is, looking at them in like, cardinal ranking order probably isn't the best way to talk about it when you have this many teams and they all look so similar. But Detroit, middle of the pack, and I think that makes sense. It's not a great park to hit in, but the matchup against Nelson is pretty appealing. He's not a particularly good pitcher. 223 expected ISO allowed to lefties since the start of last year, 210 to righties, 288 expected ISO with a 358 expected WOBA to lefties so far this season. Sets up nicely for the left-handed bats in the Tigers lineup. Colt Keith is very cheap at 2,400. Rookie second baseman, priced down because he's a rookie, and obviously you're going to have adjustments at the major league level, but he is really cheap. Kerry Carpenter at 4,300. I love Riley Green at 5,500 if you can find that salary. Again, there is sticker shock in that price tag, but he is a top prospect. You expect him to be good, and I know he started out the season really, really well. So far this season, a 136 WRC plus, 232 ISO, projects to come back to earth a little bit, like 125 to 130 WRC plus in most projection systems, 175 to 185 ISO. But he's a good high upside left-handed hitter in a good spot. Don't love the salary when you start comparing him to, other high-end outfielders, but do like the matchup for him. Think he's a good play at 4% owned. Javi Baez obviously strikes out a lot, but he is cheap if you're stacking the Tigers. Torkelson at 4K gives you some power upside. Pretty solid, easy to get to stack, I think. Individually, I do really like the value that Colt Keith offers, and I like Carpenter and Green individually just because of their upside. Very difficult for me to want to get to Arizona going up against arguably the best pitcher on the slate. Cincinnati taking on the Dodgers in LA tonight after being a really, really good offense last night against Tyler Glasnow, because that's how baseball's been going lately. We have James Paxton on the mound for the Dodgers, Frankie Montas going for the Reds. Neither pitcher getting much ownership. Paxton's getting a little bit at 8,400. It's a pretty good matchup against the Reds. You have strikeouts in this lineup. De La Cruz will be hitting right-handed, which is his weaker side. But Paxton is not the same strikeout pitcher that he used to be. And it makes it just difficult to really want to prioritize him, especially when he's not cheap at 8,400. I do think you get to him before Montas, given that he's facing the Reds and Montas is facing the Dodgers. Offensively, if you can afford the Dodgers, great. We're seeing the same thing here that we saw yesterday, and I think it makes sense. If you look at two-man stacks or three-man stacks, the Dodgers move up the list. If you go to all stacks, they move down because they are just expensive, and it's going to be difficult to get 5 of them in a lineup probably. But getting to Shohei Ohtani is going to look great. Getting to Muncy, Smith, Betts, whoever, those guys are all going to look good individually or as part of mini stacks. If you can get to a full stack, then awesome. There will be value bats you can use from different teams to get these guys into lineups. There are typically a couple of cheap bats in the Dodgers lineup as well. James Outman, for example, at 3,100 gives you some salary relief. But yeah, the Dodgers look good. If you can get to them, great. Montas isn't a bad pitcher. We still don't know exactly what he is in 2024, given how much time he missed due to injuries. Prior to injury, he was a pretty good pitcher. So far this year, 187 expected ISO, 350 expected WOBA allowed to lefties. Better numbers against righties with a 307 expected WOBA, 135 expected ISO. So again, not to say that you shouldn't be playing Will Smith and Mookie Betts, but it looks really good for Shohei Ohtani, Max Muncy, a cheap James Outman. And keep in mind, this is one of the best hitters parks in baseball as well. It kind of gets not talked about for whatever reason. I think for a while, I actually thought it was a pitcher's park just in terms of like my perception of it, like before I was doing a lot of baseball content and talking about it daily. But this is one of the best hitters parks in baseball, even though it doesn't get that same sort of acknowledgement like Cincinnati does or Coors Field does. So good hitting environment. Tyler Stevenson looks like a good catching option individually going up against Paxton. He's been really good at barreling baseballs this year. It hasn't really shown up in his overall results, but he's been making quality contact. Paxton has only struck out 13% of the right-handed hitters he's faced this year. 392 expected WOBA, 187 expected ISO. This is another thing that's been weird about Paxton this season. Not only is he not striking guys out at the same clip that he did when he was in his prime before, a bunch of injuries, but he's always been somebody that was really good against opposite-handed hitters. That has not been the case this year. He's been lights out against lefties, but righties have actually been having success against him. I like this price tag on Tyler Stevenson. If Jonathan India is in the lineup, that's a pretty solid price tag. De La Cruz, again, weaker as a right-handed hitter than a lefty, but he is still a really, really high upside play. If you can get to him at no ownership, that's obviously fine. The problem is just, again, on a 13-game slate, nobody is that popular. So, like, you can play Bobby Witt at 10%, or you can play Mookie Betts at 10%. You can play Gunnar Henderson at the same ownership as De La Cruz. Like, I would rather play Gunnar than De La Cruz in their respective matchups just because Gunnar, I think, is in a really good home run spot. But, there's no denying the stolen base upside De La Cruz gives you and the hitting upside he gives you as well. Finally, we have Colorado taking on the Giants in San Francisco. Huge park downgrade for the Rockies. Not that it really matters. They can't hit anywhere. Kyle Harrison is on the mound for the Giants. I bet his over this morning. Posted that to the people that subscribe to my Dub Club betting package. I like the over 5.5 strikeouts for Harrison. I like him in DFS at 8,200 as well. Projected for 16% ownership. Showed up in about 16% of my lineups. Good strikeout matchup. Pretty highly regarded pitching prospect. 21.5% K percentage so far this season. He's not walking many guys, only an 8% walk percentage, which is good. That's something that was a question mark for him coming up from the minors was, would he be able to limit his walks? That has been the case so far. So just a good spot, good price tag. I would rather get to him than James Paxton at this price point, given what they both appear to be in the year 2024. Ryan Feltner on the other side, he is cheap. He is getting a nice park upgrade. He has seemingly made some improvements this year. If you wanted an unowned, cheap SP2, I think it's Ryan Feltner. And you can actually see it here. 11% of the lineups I built have Feltner. He's only projected for 4% ownership. You could give me a pitcher a lot worse than Feltner and tell me he's 5,500, and I would say he's underpriced. But you have one of the better pitcher parks in baseball. You have a pitcher with a 3.83 xFIP, 20.5% K percentage this year, facing a Giants team that, one, is dealing with some injuries, and two, just isn't very good. 5th highest strikeout percentage this year against right-handed pitching at 24.5%, 99 WRC plus. I'm not trying to like make Feltner into more than he is, but this is not a bad pitcher. He's getting a huge park upgrade in a good matchup. He is less expensive than some hitters on this slate. Give me some Ryan Feltner. Like, if you're going back to like the top of this show, when I didn't understand why the Yankees weren't getting more ownership against Clevenger, and it was like, okay, maybe it's because they're really expensive. If the reason I can't play, or the reason people aren't going to play the Yankees, is because they are afraid to play Ryan Feltner at 5,500. Like, I will gladly go that route. Get the best Yankees bats against Clevenger. Get Feltner at 5,500. Get some good one-offs. I think that's a really good roster construction. I hope that this holds for me, because this is there's a lot of times in the morning where some random cheap guy will be getting ownership, will be showing up in the lineups that I build. And it's, for me, it's just like, yeah, this will probably change. I hope it changes. I hope that I end up with Feltner tonight if he continues to be projected for, 5% ownership, give or take. I like getting him here, especially because also we haven't talked about other cheap SP2s. So you're getting a different roster construction. It's not like Feltner is 5,500 and we had some, like, let's say Kyle Harrison at 6K. Like we've had on some slates recently where the guy facing the Rockies, we can put aside for the sake of this conversation that they ended up sucking. But there will be a pitcher facing the Rockies at 6K. So everybody else in that price range becomes less appealing because there's a really mispriced guy. We haven't had a cheap pitcher on this slate that I'm like really excited about. So the fact that you're going to get a different roster construction by going to Feltner, in addition to getting a pitcher that is just clearly underpriced, I think Ryan Feltner should be like 7K or 7,500 here. So I like Feltner. I hope that I get to him tonight. I hope that, this discrepancy holds for me, because I really like Ryan Feltner. I don't like offenses really in this park. Again, Feltner, I think, is a pretty solid pitcher. Harrison, I think, is a good pitcher. The Rockies don't have a lot of good hitting. Neither really do the Giants. So far this season, 135 expected ISO to righties for Feltner, 133 to lefties. Lefties have a 280 expected WOBA against him. Most of the bats you would want to get to from the Giants are left-handed. The Rockies are showing up more for me than the Giants, which I guess actually kind of makes sense here. Brandon Rodgers is really cheap at 3K. Tovar is cheap. But overall, I have a really hard time wanting to get the offenses here. I do like the pitching. Harrison, just a solid mid-range play. Feltner, to me, looks like a very good contrarian value play. So to recap the top overall pitchers tonight, for me, I really like Cole Reagans at the top. Good matchup against Oakland. Obviously, really good pitcher. Nestor Cortez against the White Sox. Tarek Skubal, not a great matchup, but a very, very good pitcher. I like Skubal. Kyle Harrison as well. My favorite contrarian pitcher, don't have to go back very far in the show to find that one. It's Ryan Feltner, and it's not particularly close. I really hope that ownership stays where it is. Offensively, I like the Yankees. Again, that didn't show up a ton in the lineups that I built, but I do like getting to the Yankees. Hopefully can find some salary to get there. I like the Rangers going up against Tyler Anderson in Texas. Bobby Witt in particular, I like. I like the Braves if the weather in that game cooperates. Don't know if it will. Favorite contrarian hitters. Again, in the lineups I built, it's Oakland. I don't really agree. I think that changes. I hope that changes. But I do have some interest in Tampa Bay against Chris Bassett, Josh Lowe in particular, but he's not contrarian because everybody's going to be there. I like the Yankees at the ownership that they're getting, just from what I want my lineups to look like, what I think they will end up looking like, or at least could end up looking like. I like the Yankees as a contrarian team. Top stacks overall, Texas. Again, I like Boston. I didn't think I was going to like Boston, but I do. They just set up pretty nicely against Gibson. I like getting to KC because they have Bobby Witt and because they have some value outside of him. So I think like Texas, Boston, KC are the stacks that I like the most. And then again, the Yankees against Clevenger, not getting much ownership, not showing up much for me right now, but I do like getting there. So that's all I have for this show. Thank you for checking it out. Again, if you have ideas, if you have things that you want me to talk about from a strategy standpoint, more in depth, post them in the comments below or let me know on Twitter. Happy to read through that stuff. Other than that, thanks for checking out the show and good luck on your lineups tonight.